Ezra Delacroix never missed a step. He was the kind of man who could tell when a book was a millimeter out of place on the shelf. He knew how many seconds it took for the elevator to get from the ground floor to his 7th-floor penthouse. He remembered the name of the sommelier at the restaurant he frequented every Monday, and the name of the wine she had suggested to him 2 months earlier. Details defined him. Predictability sustained him. So when the elevator stopped on the 5th floor, he frowned. I hadn't pressed that button. I was sure of it. The floor slowly lit up as the doors slid aside with a metallic hiss. A ceiling light flickered for a second and then stabilized. The air that came in through the elevator crack was warmer than the rest of the building, almost humid, as if it had its own microclimate, a space displaced from the thermal logic of the building. Ezra hesitated. There was no sound in the hallway, no movement, just the thick silence that seemed to hold something inside it, a kind of waiting suspended in the air. And then, something that shouldn't be there, a voice. Ezra, low, feminine, whispered like wind across the hinges of an ancient door. Ezra froze. The sound hadn't come from an apartment. It sounded like it had come from the elevator, as if it were in there with him. The air around him vibrated slightly. He turned his head abruptly, but he was alone. Still, he felt the skin on his neck crawl, as if he were being watched. The display still read 5. The yellowish lighting in the hallway cast thin shadows on the walls, and that was when he saw it. The red door. It was the only one in the wing. A deep, dull red, almost burnt wine. It would look old, perhaps restored. A contrast to the building's modern, standardized style. The number 507, in dark metal, was slightly askew. In place of a peephole, black tape neatly covered the lens. He took a step forward. The sound of the Italian heel echoed on the marble, dry and incisive. His body was forward before his thoughts could react. 2 more steps. The scent in the air had changed. No incense, no flowers, but a subtle scent like wet skin after a shower. Familiar somehow, intimately strange. When he was less than a meter from the door, the voice whispered again, "You're back." I knew it. Ezra stepped back. The sound now came clearly from inside apartment 507, and it was no ordinary voice. There was a kind of recognition in the intonation that went beyond physical, as if she were speaking to a place inside him, as if she had known him from a time before time. He couldn't remember the last time anyone had said his name like that, or anyone who had actually had the emotional permission to do so. The elevator doors began to close behind him. He turned his head, his hand still half raised, undecided. A brief impulse came, to try, to touch the door, to say something back, but he didn't say. He let the elevator close and take him back to the 7th floor. The ride was longer than usual, as if the floors were further apart, as if the building had somehow changed since he had heard that voice. The penthouse greeted him in silence. The half-open blinds filtered the city with a grayish-blue hue. He loosened his tie, unbuttoned his shirt, and poured himself a whiskey, a ritual that usually grounded him in the present. But not tonight. That night, everything seemed out of place. He stood before the enormous glass wall. The sleeping skyscrapers flickered with timid lights, and the sound of the outside world seemed muffled by invisible layers of foam. One detail, however, remained clear within him. "You're back." I knew it. The voice echoed like an echo in an endless corridor. Ezra closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, he looked at his phone. A notification flashed. Security cameras, motion detected at 03. He frowned. He didn't remember activating alerts for that time. Still, he opened the app and searched for the corresponding video. Night image, black and white. Elevator, 5th floor. He is standing, body slightly leaning forward. Face indecipherable in the security lens. Nothing unusual, except a movement in the lower right corner of the image. Small, almost imperceptible. Ezra paused, zoomed in, rewinded the video 3 seconds. Then 2, then 1. There it was. A figure. Feminine. Long dark hair, as if floating in the air, despite its stillness. No face. Just the suggestion of a profile, a shadow or presence. And then, As if realizing she was being watched, she disappeared beyond the camera's field of view. Ezra stood still. The whiskey in his hand no longer made sense. That night, he went to bed early, but sleep did not come. In the dark room, the air was thicker. He ran his hand over the skin of his chest, as if trying to calm something he couldn't name. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard the whisper again, not as a memory, but as a current presence. She called him. She knew his name. And somehow, I liked the way she said it. At 3:17 a.m., he looked at the ceiling. He wasn't scared. He was restless, like someone who finds something long forgotten and doesn't know whether to approach or run away. Then a thought burst forth like a cold snap. That door wasn't there yesterday. Ezra could no longer pretend it hadn't happened. He spent the day absorbed, his eyes fixed on everything and nothing. He tried to answer emails, but he could barely type. He forgot 2 meetings, and he refused 3 phone calls. Part of him remained glued to the 5th floor hallway. The other was still trying to understand why that whispered name moved him so much. Ezra. The voice still pulsed inside him, not as a sound, but as a sensation, like someone looking at him when he turned his face away, like a memory that hurt without origin. At 11:21 p.m., he went down. No suitcase, no purpose, just impulse. In the elevator, the air felt different. Static, lightly scented, almost imperceptible. It was the same scent as the night before, jasmine, perhaps, but mixed with something more intimate. The smell of skin after a hot shower, the trace of a crumpled sheet. When he reached the 5th floor, the hallway seemed even longer. The walls, once white, seemed to have taken on a yellowish hue, as if they had absorbed the dim light and given back a tired version of the world. The sound of one's own footsteps was muffled. The impact of one's soles on the floor was barely audible. Time there walked barefoot. The red door was there, intact, closed, watching. Ezra stepped closer, as if he were entering a zone where the air was different. He could feel the heat change, the smell of the hallway evaporating, himself evaporating with it. As he stood in front of the door, his breathing became irregular. Something inside him was vibrating, a kind of pre-verbal memory. He felt like someone about to open a letter he had written, but never had the courage to read. He raised his hand. He almost touched it, but the voice stopped him. "You really came back." He stepped back. The sound passed through the wood as if the door were no barrier, as if it were skin, veil, invitation. It was more than a sound. It was a tone of satisfaction, not arrogant but intimate, as if she had been waiting for him every night, even if he didn't come. Ezra leaned lightly against the opposite wall. He needed air, but the air was inside. "Who are you?" His voice came out hoarser than he expected. Silence. Then the sound. Something light dragging on the other side, like thin fabric on wood, like someone lying down on the floor, leaning their body against the door. "You don't remember me yet, but you came. That's all that matters." Ezra felt a shiver run down his spine, not of fear, of connection, as if the voice recognized something he himself had buried. He looked around. The hallway was empty. The watch on his wrist read 11:59 p.m. 1 minute left. "Is this some kind of joke?" he asked. "Does anyone know me? Are they watching me? You don't believe me?" The voice sounded closer, lower. "But you keep coming back anyway." Ezra took a deep breath. Something was different about that voice. Something that invaded the silent parts of him, the ones he himself avoided visiting. "I don't know what I'm doing here," he said. Silence. Then the voice. "You're trying to remember who you were." "Before I forgot." Ezra felt a lump in his chest. The hallway lights flickered. Once. Twice. So midnight. The exact second the clock turned, a noise cracked behind it. Not in the hallway. In the apartment. He turned around abruptly. I was home again. I didn't know how. I didn't remember pressing the button. I didn't remember going upstairs. But I was there, standing, in the center of the room. And something was wrong. The painting on the wall, an old engraving of Paris, was crooked. Ezra walked over. He straightened it. But as he did so, something fell out from behind the frame. A ticket. Thick, folded paper, with the same handwriting as in the past. At midnight, you always listen. One day, you'll remember why. Ezra looked around. The room seemed smaller. The air was thicker, the scent more present. He put the note to his lips, without knowing why. Then he put it in the inside pocket of his jacket, next to his heart. On the cell phone screen, a new notification. Video. 5th floor corridor. Ezra watched. The image showed him standing in front of the red door. But something was strange. His face was different, as if he were smiling. A slight movement of his lips, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Ezra didn't remember smiling. That night he tried to sleep. He couldn't, but for the first time. I didn't want to. At 0:47, he whispered in a low voice, "I'll be back." And on the other side of the silence, even without sound, he was sure she heard him. Ezra woke up with his body on alert. There were no nightmares, no specific memories, but he woke up as if he had crossed a border during the night, as if he was returning from some place from which his body had not yet completely left. The hands were shaking slightly. He took a cold shower. The steam from the hot water seemed too heavy for the morning air. He chose a dark shirt, dark gray jacket, shoes polished with more care than usual. He knew what he was going to do, and it made him uneasy, as if each button on his shirt was a silent pact. At 11:36 p.m., I was in the elevator. The numbers were slowly going down. The panel was emitting a low hum, as if something within the structure of the building was aging with each floor. When the elevator stopped at the 5th, Ezra's heart skipped a beat. Not a beat of fright, but of recognition. He left. The hallway was too dark for the hour. One of the overhead lights was out, and another flickered intermittently, like an eye that didn't know whether to stay open. The red door waited, as always, but tonight it seemed more alive. The worn paint seemed to gleam in the dim light, as if it had been freshly swept by invisible fingers. The number 507 was now perfectly straight, and the peephole, previously covered in black tape, was clean. Open. Ezra walked closer. He felt his body respond before his mind. The scent in the air was more present than ever. Sweet, deep, warm. It wasn't just jasmine anymore. It was jasmine after the rain, mixed with something woody, as if the scent came from the ground itself. He stopped in front of the door. For a moment, he considered going back, going downstairs, ignoring everything, erasing it from his mind. But the truth was cruel and clear. He didn't want to forget. He raised his hand. His knuckles rested against the wood. Soft, warm, like skin. The first beat was soft, the second firmer. On the third, something changed. On the other side, a click. Not a mechanical click, not an ordinary lock. It was something more organic, like the sound of a body moving, like breath being held. Ezra remained motionless. So the voice. "You touched finally." He closed his eyes for a moment. His heart was pounding. His palms were sweating. The voice wasn't just familiar. It was intimate, as if it had been born from him. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice lower than he intended. On the other side, a light sound of footsteps on wood, barefoot. Then the voice again. "That's not the right question. It's, who were you before you forgot me?" Ezra felt the world spin. The air around him grew thick, humid. The light above the door began to waver. The atmosphere was changing, and with it, the fabric of time itself. Minutes here didn't feel the same as minutes outside. He leaned lightly against the door. He felt the heat seep through his clothes. The wood vibrated beneath his fingers. "Tell me, what is this place? Why this door? Why me?" Silence. So the answer. "Because you listened to me before you were born, and you silenced me when you decided to grow up." Ezra swallowed hard. The air smelled of something else now. Old sheets. Closed room. Trapped desire. "Let me see you," he asked. "You will never see me with my eyes open." "Why not?" The answer came after a sigh. "Because I only exist where you close your eyes. And don't pretend you don't feel." Ezra stepped back. His breathing was ragged. His fingertips tingled. He turned around, trying to compose himself. But the hallway was different. Darker. Narrower. It was as if he had gone through something he could no longer undo. The elevator took a while to arrive, but when it did, he got in. At dawn, when he arrived at the penthouse, he locked the door with more turns than usual. He walked silently, as if someone was sleeping there. He sat on the sofa, barefoot. The whiskey remained untouched. The sound of the wall clock seemed louder than before. At 2:03 a.m., he went to the bathroom mirror. He looked at his own face. Tired, red-rimmed eyes, but there was something else. An expression he hadn't seen in years. Something between desire and loss, between regret and hunger. And that's when he saw it. In the center of the chest, below the collarbone, a stain, like a trace made by dark lipstick, or red paint, or a finger with dried blood, a word written with subtlety. When you sleep, I'll come in. Ezra stood still, the shaky breath, the hands hanging at the sides of the body. He didn't know whether to clean it or leave it, but what he did in the end was turn off the light, lie down in the dark, close his eyes, and let her in. Ezra woke up to a word he didn't remember dreaming. File 43B. The sound echoed in his mind like a nonverbal order. He woke up with his eyes open, breathing as if he had emerged from underwater. The sky was gray, the city silent. The feeling was clear. Something was calling him. He drank a coffee that he didn't taste. He got dressed without thinking. He went straight down to the basement. In the elevator, the digital display failed for a few seconds. When it came back on, the numbers were distorted, as if the 5 and 3 were flashing beneath the surface layer. Ezra typed in a code he didn't even know he knew. Hashtag 9982B. The elevator complied, descending to level -2. Restricted access. The lower parking lot was different. Older, colder. The walls, made of raw concrete, seemed damp despite the absence of water. Few lights, few cars, just the sound of one's own heart in one's chest. At the end of the corridor, a dark metal door without windows. On the side, a worn plaque. File 43B. Ezra walked closer. As he reached out, the side panel flashed red. The display recognized the name. Ezra Delacroix, access granted. The latch clicked. The door opened by itself. A breath of dry air touched her face. With it perfume, jasmine, amber, and velvet. The interior was a dead archive. Metal shelves, folder upon folder. Sepulchral silence. The neon lights flickered faintly, and the hallways all looked the same, as if the place were repeating itself, like a dream trying to hide its core. Ezra walked straight, as if guided by an invisible thread. He stopped in front of a lonely bookcase, where a single drawer was painted dark red. In the center was a label. Record 507, Voice of Night Observation. Ezra pulled the drawer open. Inside was just one item, a cassette tape, and a small, old portable recorder next to it. The label on the tape bore a handwritten title, Transmission 3, for when Ezra remembers. Ezra pressed play. A hiss, then a woman's voice, not the voice. Another, professional, cold, commencing observation. May 3rd, 0000. Female voice detected on 5th floor. Subject Ezra Delacroix. Primary target, observed behavior, hesitation, emotional engagement, conscious memory block. Response intensity, increasing. Ezra felt his spine go cold. The recording continued. Signs indicate that the link with Eddie 507 still exists at a subconscious level. The voice responds to the subject's affective zones, manifesting itself at the sensory and dream threshold. Silence. Hiss. And then she. Ezra, why did you erase my name? Ezra paused the tape. He closed his eyes. The sound seemed too alive. He started again. You left me behind, but I kept hearing your footsteps. Every time you tried to forget, I got closer. Ezra felt a slight pain behind his eyes, as if something was trying to break the seal of his memory. You think you locked me in an apartment, but I was the one who created the keys to what you call reality. The sound crackled and stopped. The tape had ended. Ezra stood still, the recorder in his hands, his body rigid. Something was moving in the shadows at the back of the room, but it wasn't anyone. It was him, in another time, remembering. He left without thinking. He climbed the stairs. He didn't want the elevator. Each floor seemed more oppressive. His breathing became heavier. When he reached his penthouse, he locked the door. He sat on the floor. Lights off. Total silence. On the marble in the room, on the light carpet, there was something that wasn't there before. A piece of fabric. Black velvet. Above it, a single sentence written in red lipstick. "Now you know where I hid." Ezra leaned his head against the wall. He closed his eyes, and he listened. For the first time, not from the other side of the door, but from inside it. Sybil. Ezra didn't turn on the lights. He walked through the apartment, guided only by the shadows. The city flickered outside the window like a sleeping organism, indifferent to what was growing inside it. The piece of black velvet, still on the floor, seemed to breathe, as if it had been left there by someone who would return soon. He bent down and picked it up carefully. It was warm to the touch, soft, but with a peculiar density, as if it absorbed the heat from the skin. There was dampness at the edges, as if it had been pressed against something, or someone. Ezra brought the fabric to his face and felt it, not a smell, but a memory. Sybil. The name was now more than sound. It was shape. It was color. It was desire. He took the piece of velvet to the bedroom, placed it on the pillow, and undressed slowly, as if preparing for a meeting with his own past. At 2:14 a.m., the room shook, not with sound, with presence. Ezra lay on the white sheet, his eyes closed, his arms hanging loosely at his sides. There was no touch, but he felt it, a warmth that was approaching, like steam rising from bare skin, like the first second before a kiss. And then the sound, not the voice, not yet, but a more intimate sound, the sound of velvet on skin, like someone slowly crawling over a sheet with their body covered in something dark, a sound that awakened the most primitive senses. Ezra remained still. His heart was racing. The hairs on his body were on alert. Sweat was beginning to form on the back of his neck. She was there. "Do you want me awake now?" A voice whispered next to his ear. Ezra turned around. There was no one in the room, but the bed sagged on the left side, as if someone was lying there right now. "You touched me in my dreams, but now, do you want to feel me awake?" He ran his fingers over the sheet. It was damp to the touch, slightly warm, as if someone had just gotten up, or was still there unseen. "Where are you?" he asked in a low voice. She responded from everywhere. "Inside what you didn't say, in the skin you didn't touch, in what you wanted, but were ashamed to want." Ezra closed his eyes. The velvet was pulled from his hand by fingers he did not see. And then he felt it, a touch on the ribs, light, feminine, like a finger scratching an ancient name. Then the collarbone, then the curve of the neck. Every inch traveled was like a physical memory. Ezra whispered, "I want to see you." She lay on top of him, weightless, but warm, like a blanket of desire. "You don't need to see me. You feel me. You remind me." Ezra narrowed his eyes. For a second, just a second, he saw the outline of a face, long hair, a dark gleam in the eyes, and a half-open mouth. But when he tried to focus, it disappeared. Only the sound remained, the sound of velvet being slowly pulled over your body. In the morning, he woke up to sunlight touching the cold floor. The bed was unmade, but he didn't remember moving. His body still carried the scent. On the bathroom mirror, there was a new inscription, drawn like steam that forms with the heat of the bath. 3 words. "Today with open eyes." Ezra stared at the sentence. Something was changing. She was no longer just a nocturnal presence. She was no longer just a space between sleep and oblivion. Now, she wanted to exist with him awake. Ezra no longer knew what was a daydream and what was reality. He had woken up with a taste of her in his mouth, a bittersweet, indefinable taste that stayed with him even after he had brushed his teeth. The morning light seemed different, more golden, slower, as if the world outside was trying to imitate the temperature of Sybil's eyes. He tried to work, but his fingers hesitated on the keyboard, as if waiting for orders from another source. Every time he closed his eyes for more than 3 seconds, he saw the dark velvet dragging across the floor. He felt the heat of her skin on his shoulder, the sound of her breathing behind the door. At 11:42 p.m., he went down. The elevator still obeyed his call, but it seemed slower, as if it now knew Ezra's secrets and refused to rush their meeting. The fifth floor greeted him with the sound of damp on the walls. There was something alive there, or multiple somethings. The air was thick, saturated with perfume. The central light had gone out completely, leaving only the glow of the emergency lights on the sides. The red door stood out like a painting pulsing in an empty museum. Ezra stepped closer, this time without hesitation. The doorknob was warm. It spun under his fingers, and for the first time, the door opened. Apartment 507 was just one room. No divisions, no visible windows, no furniture. Just dark wood on the floor and walls, and in the center of the ceiling, an incandescent bulb that flickered slightly, as if blown by something that could not be seen. Ezra walked in. The air there was warmer, almost too intimate, a kind of heat that made your skin react, as if you were being watched from very close up. At the back of the room, something reflected the light, a mirror. It hung like an altar in the center of the far wall. Black frame, carved details that resembled wings or roots. The mirror was large enough to show the entire body, but its reflection was slightly distorted, like still water. Ezra walked up to him, and then, you see, in the reflection, he was accompanied. Behind him, a figure, feminine, slow, like liquid shadow, long hair, hidden face, dark dress, tight to the body, like an extension of the skin. Ezra turned quickly. Nothing. The room was empty. He turned back to the mirror. She was still there. "You came in, Ezra," said the voice, not from the mirror, but inside his own head. "Are you here?" he asked. "I am in everything, in what you touch and don't see, in what you feel and don't say." The figure in the mirror moved. It placed its hands on Ezra's shoulders. In the reflection, he reacted as if he had sensed it, but in the royal room, no one touched him. You need objects to believe, but I am made of the part of you that doesn't need to see to know. Ezra pressed his forehead against the mirror. The surface was cool, but his body felt warm, as if the touch were coming from inside the glass. "Why this place? Why no furniture?" she whispered. "Because there are no distractions here. Here you only have me." And then, the figure in the reflection came even closer. It pressed its lips to his ear and said, "Lie on the floor, where your memory touches my body." Ezra obeyed. The floor was warm. The smell of jasmine now mixed with something more human, sweat, velvet, and some mineral note, like old iron. With his eyes closed, he felt her weight on his chest. Not physical, but emotional, like a blanket made from all the nights he'd tried to be rational. "You didn't come to understand me, Ezra. You came to remember." Hours later, he woke up in his own bed, clothes stuck to his body, heart racing. The nails on his right hand were marked, as if they had scratched wood or skin. On the pillow, a sheet of paper, perfect handwriting. "When you stop running away, you will remember what made me forgotten." And in the corner of the leaf, a drop of perfume, velvet. Ezra spent the entire day in silence. He didn't talk to anyone. He didn't leave the house. He barely moved. He sat on the living room floor, staring into the mirror that had appeared the night before. The same mirror from the unfurnished room. Now it was leaning against the living room wall, between the bookshelves and the piano that Ezra hadn't played in years. The reflection was clear, but on the left side of the image, there was always a blur, something I couldn't focus on, as if the mirror wanted to show without allowing us to see. At 11:58 p.m., Ezra closed the curtains. He turned on only one low lamp in the corner of the room. He sat on the floor, legs crossed. He closed his eyes. He waited. The temperature changed slowly. The air grew warm. Her perfume filled the space, jasmine and velvet, with a metallic note in the background, like the memory of a cold ring against her skin. And then she spoke. "Can I show you now?" Ezra opened his eyes slowly. The mirror in front of him was illuminated, as if reflecting a light that was not present in the room, and the image in it changed. It wasn't him sitting there anymore. It was a different him. Younger, slightly longer hair, less marked face, more open eyes. And next to it her, Sybil, now visible. Long black dress, hair down, bare feet, sitting on the edge of a bed that Ezra didn't recognize, but his body did. "You were always afraid of me, Ezra," she said, her eyes fixed on his. "Afraid of what I made you feel. Afraid of what happened to you when you were around me." In the mirror, young Ezra was silent. He was breathing deeply. His body seemed torn between desire and retreat. "You called me your addiction," she continued, "but I never asked for that. I just wanted you to see me whole, and not as something you had to erase later." Ezra, in the present, stood still. Tears began to form without him realizing it. "Did I do this to you?" he asked quietly. The mirror image did not respond, but Sybil, now beside him, responded in a whispered voice behind the back of his neck. "You wanted me more than you should have. Then you locked me behind rational walls. You silenced me with decisions, with fear, with cowardice." Ezra squeezed his eyes shut. The pain wasn't new. It was old, but only now was he ready to feel it all. "Why now?" he murmured. "Why did you come back?" Sybil stepped even closer. Her voice seemed to rock the room like a moving silk sheet. "Because now you are empty enough, and full of silence enough, to hear me without trying to understand." Ezra turned slowly. The room was empty, but your body doesn't. He felt fingers on his skin. Fingers that left no marks, just memories. "You called me so many names," she whispered, "but you never told me the real one, the name that made me exist." Ezra swallowed hard. In the mirror, his reflection smiled, a smile he didn't remember having in years. "What's your name?" he asked. She leaned close to his ear, her breath brushing against his skin, and he said, "Sybil." The name cut through him like a sharp breath. Ezra put his hands to his chest. A warmth spread, an old, raw, forgotten emotion. He remembered, of a night, of a room, of a decision, of a love that didn't fit into rules, labels, or contracts, of a woman who existed more inside him than outside, and that he, in fear, deleted. The next morning, Ezra woke up on the couch. The candles were burned out. Daylight filtered through the curtains that were still closed. And on the mirror, drawn in a lipstick line, was written, "Now you remember. Now you are my reflection." Ezra felt no fear. He felt relief, as if the void inside him, which he had tried so hard to fill with logic and control, had finally returned to its natural state. She lived in. Ezra stopped going out. The city moved on. Lights continued to flicker beyond the windows. Messages piled up on the phone. The world moved on, but he doesn't. I stayed at home. Curtains closed. Absolute silence. Sitting in front of the mirror. Now he called her. That's where she came from. No longer just at midnight, but when he wanted, when he needed, when he closed his eyes with sincerity. She was approaching, with perfume, with warmth, with memory, and with something new. Constant presence. That last night, Ezra felt his heart beat differently. It wasn't anxiety. It was peace. He got out of bed and walked naked into the living room. The mirror was waiting for him, like a portal between desire and the unsaid. He sat down in front of him. The lights were off. Only the yellowish lamp in the corner created shadows on the floor. He closed his eyes. "I'm ready," he said, in an almost childish whisper. And she came, not in parts, not in pieces, not as whispers, not as veils, but whole. The heat started in his shoulders. It moved down his back. It reached his thighs. And finally, the center of his chest, where her name still burned silently. Sybil wrapped her invisible arms around him, but they felt like living skin. "You took a while," she whispered. "I was scared. Me too. But I'm made of this, Ezra. Of what is feared. Of what is forgotten. Of what is felt only when you close your eyes." Ezra took a deep breath. She ran her fingers over his face. "Light. Warm. You locked me away when you didn't know how to deal with me. But now, I can touch you without scaring you." Ezra let her lay him down on the ground. He felt himself floating, even though he was still. The city, the floors, the appointments, the names, the external voices disappeared. There was only the sound of her breathing, and the certainty that finally he remembered. The next morning, the building's residents were surprised. The penthouse door was ajar. Candles were melted on the floor. The air was thick and perfumed. And in the center of the room, Ezra Delacroix was lying down, calm, serene, eyes closed. Next to the body, a mirror, no reflection. And on his chest, a single sentence, written in dark red lipstick. Now he lives with me, in the place that only exists when you close your eyes. Some say that from time to time, those passing by the 5th floor hear sounds behind door 507, a velvet drag, a soft, feminine voice saying a name, Ezra, and another male, responding in a whisper, Sybil.